By the time the cleaning crew rattled their carts down the hallway, the office felt like a hollow box. I was still at my desk at Lumen Vista, staring at wireframes no one would remember in a week, when my phone buzzed with a single short vibration. I had texted the family group earlier asking which room I was supposed to take in the cat, since the listing clearly showed 12 beds and no one had answered me all week. Instead of a normal reply, Dad's name flashed across the screen. The message was short, cold, final. No room for you on the Christmas trip. Maybe next year. I kept reading the words as if they might rearrange themselves into something reasonable. But there was no typo, no follow-up, no explanation. Nothing except that blunt answer. Before I tell you what I did next, let me ask you something. What are you doing while you listen to this story? Walking? Cooking? Trying to clear your mind. For me, the night everything cracked open, I was standing in worn sneakers with a cold cup of coffee on my desk, doing everything I could to pretend I was fine. If stories like this keep you company, tell me what you are doing right now. I promise it matters later. I opened the family group chat. The cabin link from September was still pinned at the top. Sleep 12. Hot tub. Fire pit. I had already bought boots and thermal leggings for that trip. A new notification slid across my screen. Mom had posted photos. Hart family Christmas cabin. There they were in front of the SUV. Dad in his red beanie. Mom in her white sweater. Ethan and Megan in matching scarves. Emily laughing, cheeks pink. And standing beside her was a man I barely knew. Aiden, her boyfriend of maybe 3 months, smiling like he had earned a place I had apparently lost. 8 people in the picture. A cabin built for 12. So there was room. Just not for me. My chest went strangely quiet, like everything inside froze instead of breaking. David must have seen that I read his message, because another text appeared. You understand. Do I? I stared at those words until the screen dimmed. I understood exactly. I was the piece they could remove without the picture looking crooked. I typed 2 words, deleted them, replaced them with something smaller. No worries. I sent it before I could talk myself into being polite again. The office looked blurred around the edges as I shut my laptop and left. Outside, the Seattle air hit my face with that cold, wet bite that felt like a slap. 4 blocks later, I walked into my apartment, where the 3 wrapped gifts I had bought for them sat on the table like a joke I had played on myself. I picked up my phone with numb fingers and opened a browser. Paris winter flights from Seattle. I scrolled through a list of options, like I was looking at someone else's life. Then one flight caught my eye, leaving the next afternoon, arriving early Sunday morning. My savings could cover it. I had vacation days. I had nothing keeping me here. Fine, I thought. If there is no room at your table, I will make room somewhere else. I booked the ticket. The next morning, I stood in the SeaTac security line with my old carry-on packed fast and uneven. By the time I landed in Paris, the air smelled like cold stone and baking bread. I checked into a tiny hotel wedged between a bakery and a flower shop and walked straight to a cafe around the corner. I sat by the fogged window, ordered a croissant, and took a photo of the street. The Eiffel Tower peeked between 2 buildings like it was watching me breathe for the first time in years. I posted the photo with a simple caption about quiet mornings and winter resets. I set my phone down and tried to let myself be still. 3 minutes passed. Then the screen lit up. Missed calls. 1 from Mom, 2 from Dad. Then more. Ethan, Emily, Mom again, Dad again. The family group chat flashes like a warning light. I counted them. 32 missed calls. My heart did not leap with hope. It sank with clarity. They were not panicking because they missed me. They were panicking because, for the first time, I had stepped out of the doorway they always kept me in. Tell me something. Has anyone ever looked you in the eye and told you there was no room for you, and then panicked when you finally walked away? I stared at the phone vibrating in my hand until the screen dimmed, then went still again. The cafe around me hummed with soft morning noise, cups touching saucers, chairs scraping gently across worn tile, a door opening and letting in a burst of cold Paris air. I slipped the phone into my coat pocket and tried to focus on the smell of warm bread and roasted coffee, anything that did not sound like my family reaching for me only after they realized I was not where they had placed me. The next morning arrived quietly. I woke to the muted light that Paris seems to hold even on clear winter days, a soft silver glow that makes buildings look older and people look calmer. My small hotel room was chilly, and I wrapped my sweater tighter around myself as I stepped into the hallway, and then down the narrow stairs to the street. The air outside tasted crisp, like something new. I walked a few blocks until the same little cafe from the day before came into view. Its windows fogged at the edges, its front door propped slightly open even in the cold. A bell jingled lightly as I stepped inside. The warmth hit my face and the butter scent from the pastries behind them. Counter drifted toward me like a greeting. I ordered a croissant and a café crème and carried them to a small table by the window. I set the phone face down at first, pretending I could give myself one uninterrupted meal, but my hand kept drifting toward it. Finally, I flipped it over and pressed play on the first voicemail. It was my dad. His voice was sharp, clipped, tense in that signature way he uses when he thinks he is being rational. He said things like, "Why would you do this during the holidays?" And, "You made this harder for everyone." He sounded more inconvenienced than worried. When the message ended, there was a pause, and then the next one started automatically. This one came from my mom. Her voice trembled a little, not with fear or concern, but with embarrassment. She said people were already asking about me, and she wished I had given her a heads up so she could have prepared something to say. She told me my timing was terrible, that I had put her in a bad position, that I needed to stop drawing attention. I paused the message halfway through. It tightened something in my chest that I did not want to examine too closely. The third voicemail came from Emily. She spoke fast, too fast, like she did not want to leave room for me to think. She said I was making everything messy, and now she had to explain to people why I was being dramatic. There was a rustling sound in the background, maybe someone else in the cabin kitchen. Then she sighed into the phone, a long, annoyed sigh that reminded me of when we were teenagers and she slammed her door because I borrowed her sweater without asking. The message ended there. I took a sip of my coffee and tasted a bitterness I knew was not from the beans. I opened the social app, though I knew I should not. The first thing I saw was my mom's cabin photo. The comments had grown overnight. Most were harmless, little hearts and snowflake emojis from her friends at work, but a few stood out. "Where is Mackenzie? Thought she was going." "Miss seeing the whole family together." They were simple questions, but they carried weight. My family hated questions that did not have a clean answer. I refreshed the page again, then set the phone aside and forced myself to look out the window instead. Across the street, a bakery worker swept the front steps, sending little crumbs of crust into the gutter. A couple carrying paper bags passed by, bundled in thick scarves. A delivery van parked near the corner, the driver hopping out and disappearing into a shop. Life was happening whether or not my family approved. The croissant flaked beneath my fingers. I tore off a piece, feeling the soft, warm center under the crisp shell, and let it sit on my tongue a moment before swallowing. It felt grounding, normal. Something my body understood even when my heart did not. The bell over the door chimed again. When I looked up, a woman with dark hair pulled into a loose knot stepped behind the counter. She greeted the barista in French, her voice gentle and steady. Then she turned slightly and noticed me watching. She came over, wiping her hands on her apron, and said good morning in lightly accented English. I told her the croissant was perfect. She smiled in a way that reached her eyes. "I am Claire," she said, touching her chest lightly. "I own this place. You came yesterday also, yes?" I nodded. Something about her presence felt safe, like talking to someone who had no stake in my choices. She asked if I was visiting family. I hesitated a heartbeat too long. Then I said I was visiting myself. She laughed softly and said that was a very good person to visit. Then she went back to the counter, leaving me with the quiet warmth of someone who did not demand explanations. I finished my breakfast slowly, stretching out each sip of coffee as if that could slow down the thoughts in my head. My eyes drifted outside again and caught sight of a family standing near the edge of the sidewalk. A man and a woman, both middle-aged, wearing matching red wool hats. Between them stood a little girl, maybe 6 years old, holding a tiny wrapped gift in her gloved hands. The father bent down and brushed snowflakes off her hat. The mother shifted her scarf around the girl's neck. They seemed to be getting ready to take a picture. The father pulled out his phone and crouched so they could all squeeze into the frame. The girl beamed at him, her whole face shining. She held the little gift close to her chest like it was treasure. Something inside me tugged hard. The image pressed on an old bruise I thought I had learned to ignore. I remembered the feeling of sitting on my childhood porch steps on Christmas, mornings when my family went to see cousins without me because someone needed to watch the house. I remembered being 14 and listening to laughter behind a closed door because they did a family photo and forgot to call me in. I remembered telling myself it did not matter, that the picture looked better with fewer people anyway. But watching that little girl stand there between her parents, safe and warm and fully included, made something in me ache. It was not jealousy exactly. More like recognition that I had survived too many years being left out of. Frames I should have belonged in. Claire stepped over to clear a table near mine and glanced out the window. She said they look happy, and I nodded, still staring at the family as they laughed at something the little girl did. The father tried again to take the picture, his hands shaking with cold or amusement, and the mother leaned down to kiss the girl's cheek. The girl giggled and threw her arms around them both. I watched until they walked away, disappearing into the flow of people on the sidewalk. Even when they were gone, the space they occupied seemed to shimmer in my mind. The contrast between that small moment of belonging and everything I had felt over the last 24 hours was sharp enough to make me almost dizzy. I pressed my palm lightly against my chest and breathed slow, steady breaths until the ache softened. I reminded myself I was in Paris. I had brought myself here. I had not been invited, but I had arrived anyway. The cafe door opened again and cold air swept across the floor. Claire looked up and greeted the new customer. I gathered my things, slipped a few euros onto the table, and stood. The outside light felt brighter now, almost harsh, but it pulled at me in a way that felt like a challenge. When I stepped onto the sidewalk, the city spread out before me, full of narrow streets and old stone and voices rising and falling in a language I did not speak. The little family was nowhere in sight. The morning traffic murmured like a distant tide. I tucked my hands into my pockets and started walking, unsure of where I was going, but knowing I needed to keep moving. The phone in my pocket buzzed again, a soft, insistent reminder that my world back home was not finished with me. I kept walking anyway. I did not know it then, but while I was following a narrow Paris street that smelled like coffee, cold stone, the cabin in Colorado was buzzing like a kicked hornet's nest. My dad had picked a place outside of Breckenridge. Big, high ceilings, exposed beams, stone fireplace, the kind of place that photographs well. The morning after I posted my quiet little picture, he was standing in that living room, holding his phone so tightly his knuckles went white. The fire cracked. Snow was falling softly outside, and he did not seem to see any of it. He stared at his screen, scrolling, breathing hard through his nose. My Paris photo had floated into the feeds of people who followed my mom and my sister. Someone at their church had shared it, then another. By the time the second pot of coffee finished brewing in the cabin kitchen, half the church committee in Tacoma had seen that Mackenzie, the daughter who was supposed to be too busy or too something for the family cabin, was sitting in a cafe with the Eiffel Tower in the background. In the kitchen, my mom moved around like a woman hosting a show. Muffins in a basket, fruit sliced in a bowl, holiday napkins she had brought from home laid out just so. She kept checking her phone every few seconds when she thought no one was looking. She got a message from Marian, one of the older women at church. It was a private one, not on the public page. Marian asked her why I was not in the cabin photo and said that it was strange, because everyone knew I was the one who always volunteered for the fall festival and the charity drives. There were a couple of little heart emojis, but the questions sat there between the words, heavy and plain. Another message came from the woman who ran the food pantry. She said she just saw that I was in Paris and asked if this meant I would not be helping with the New Year donation sorting this time. Then she added that she hoped I was taking care of myself because someone as generous as me deserved to be taken care of too. My mom read those messages with her lips pressed thin. The part about me being generous, about other people noticing that I was missing, made her cheeks flush. She typed and deleted replies, then tucked the phone in her apron and went back to arranging muffins like they might fix everything. At the long cabin table, Emily sat next to Aiden. He looked slightly out of place in that room, still trying to fit himself into a family he barely knew. He drank his coffee slowly, eyes moving from person to person, taking in the old rhythms he was not part of yet. He had his own phone on the table. When my post popped up in his feed, it took him a second to understand what he was looking at. He saw the cafe, the tower in the distance, and the caption about quiet mornings. Then he looked at my username, blinked, and checked it again. He knew my name. He had scrolled past my profile a few times when Emily had tagged me in. Something old. All fall, whenever my face popped up on her screen, she brushed it off, telling him I was chained to my job and never came home for holidays. She said I was always the busiest at the end of the year, that my company could not function without me. She said things in a light, breezy way like they were facts and not choices. Now he sat there in that big, warm cabin, watching my parents pour orange juice and joke about ski runs, and he held in his hand proof that I was across the ocean, sitting in a cafe I had chosen myself, not buried at work, not locked in some office. He leaned toward Emily and kept his voice low so my dad would not hear him. He told her that he thought I was staying in Seattle for work, that this did not look like work. He asked her if everything was okay between me and my parents. Emily shifted in her seat. She shrugged, reached for a muffin she did not eat, said that I liked making things complicated, that I liked to put on a show. She said I could have come if I wanted. I just did not like to make the effort. Aiden watched her face when she said it. He noticed that she would not quite meet his eyes. He grew up in a house where feelings were not decorative, where his mom called people directly when there was a problem, instead of smoothing it over online. Something about all this made the small hairs on his arms stand up. My dad came over to the table and asked Aiden if he was ready to try the bigger slopes. His voice carried that festive cheer he put on for social media, but there was a tightness at the edges of his smile that did not match the tone. Every few seconds, his eyes flicked back to his phone where new notifications were lining up. Someone had left a comment under my mom's cabin photo, the one with all of them in front of the SUV. It was from one of the ladies who ran the church bake sale. She asked where I was and added that it just did not feel like the holidays, without seeing the whole Hart family together. A couple of other women liked the comment. It floated there like a little protest sign in a sea of happy messages. My dad hated anything that messed with his image. He cared about what the men at the country club thought, what the pastor thought, what his clients thought when he talked about being a family man. The idea that some of those people might now be picturing his daughter alone in Paris while he skied with a new boyfriend was clawing at him. He grabbed his jacket and told everyone they were heading to the slopes. He barked it more than said it. My mom fussed with her scarf and asked if he was going to respond to Marianne. He snapped that they would handle it later, that people blew things out of proportion, that this was just social media nonsense. On the drive to the mountain, the car was almost too warm, heat blasting, the windows fogging at the corners. Ethan and Megan sat in the back talking quietly about which runs they wanted to try. Emily scrolled through her phone in the front. Aiden sat beside her, his hands fidgeting with the zipper on his jacket. He glanced at her screen and saw the family group chat. He watched the top of the thread where my name sat in gray and silent. Message after message from my mom and dad and siblings stacked up, all with no response from me. At least, none that he could see. He asked Emily, soft but clear, whether she had really told me there was no room. She shot him a look. That warning look couples use when they want the other person to drop something. She said it was more complicated than that he did not understand the history, that my energy could be a lot around the holidays, and the trip was meant to be peaceful. That word hung in the air. Peaceful. As if I was the noise. By the time they got back to the cabin, tired and red-cheeked from the cold, the sky was starting to go that soft pink it gets in the mountains right before dark. The porch light flicked on automatically. Inside, the fire had burned down to glowing coals. My mom checked her phone as soon as she kicked off her boots. Another message from one of the church ladies was waiting. This one came from a woman who had always been friendly to me, someone whose grandkids I used to help with homework at the church basement. She wrote that she hoped I was okay, and added that I had always been such a help to everyone. Then she asked my mom, plain and simple, if something had happened, because it did not seem like me to be so far away at Christmas unless I had a reason. My mom read it, and something inside her tightened. For years, she had told the story of me being difficult, emotional, and dramatic. But now, that story was brushing up against another truth, the one other people had seen. The girl who stayed late to help clean up after church events, who always signed up to bring dessert for fundraisers. She walked into the kitchen and poured herself a glass of wine she did not really want. Aiden came in behind her. Emily was upstairs changing for dinner. Ethan and my dad were messing with the television in the living room, trying to get some sports channel to work. In the quiet of the kitchen, my mom muttered under her breath that this was getting out of hand, that people were starting to ask the wrong questions. Aiden cleared his throat and asked her gently what she meant. Linda turned, caught off guard by his presence. She had forgotten he had followed her. She smiled the practiced smile she used at church luncheons and said that friends from home were just confused, that they did not understand family dynamics. She said Mackenzie liked to go her own way, that she did not fit in well with big groups. Aiden listened, still, focused. He told her that from where he was standing, it looked like Mackenzie had been invited, and then something changed, because Emily had talked about planning the trip with her. He said it, not as an accusation, but as an observation. He added that it was hard to reconcile the picture of a selfish sister with the messages he had seen from people who clearly cared about me. Linda opened her mouth to answer, but the words that had been swirling in her head all day slipped out before she could polish them. She said that the whole point of the cabin was to try out a smaller group, something more curated, that they had invited him to balance things out because Mackenzie tended to set off the whole mood. She said her presence ruined the whole vibe for everyone, and that this year, they wanted something that felt lighter. The second the words left her mouth, she seemed to hear them at the same time as Aiden did. Her hand flew to her lips, as if she could stuff them back in. He stood very still. The sounds from the living room drifted in. My dad laughing a little too loudly at something on the television, the clink of Ethan opening a bottle. Aiden replayed her sentence in his head. They had invited him, a man they barely knew, in part because my existence made their holiday feel less enjoyable, because my presence did not fit their picture. He thought about the fact that I was alone in Paris right then, drinking coffee in a foreign city, while they sat in a cabin, telling themselves this was peace. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then he nodded once, slowly, and looked away, his jaw tight. My mom tried to backtrack, to add that families were complicated, and that of course they loved me, that I was just sensitive. But the damage was done. The truth had slipped through the cracks of her script. Upstairs, Emily called down for him to come see something funny on her phone. He did not move right away. The cabin, full of warm light and holiday decorations, suddenly felt to him like a stage set. He could feel the cold outside pressing at the windows, the snow piling higher against the deck. He realized, in that quiet kitchen lit by under-cabinet lights, that he had stepped into a story where one person had been written out long before she ever booked a ticket to Paris. Back in Seattle, while I was following side streets in Paris and trying to memorize the way the light hit the old stone, my inbox quietly turned into something else. At Lumen Vista, it was still late Saturday night. The building was dark except for the cleaning crew and a few servers humming. In the background, but somewhere across town, my teammate Sophie was sitting on her couch with her laptop open. She had this habit of clearing out her email before each new sprint, even on weekends, so she did not feel ambushed on Monday morning. She told me later that she almost ignored the notification from our shared project inbox. It was from the general people team address, the kind you assume is about benefits or a policy update, but the subject line had my full name in it. That caught her eye. She clicked and found a forwarded message from our head of people, Daniel. Above his short note, the original email sat like a landmine. It was from Megan Hart, my sister-in-law, using her professional address from the tech company where she worked in human resources. In that message, Megan introduced herself as a concerned family member. She said she wanted to make the company aware that I had a pattern of posting photos online in ways that seemed designed to pull pity and attention. She wrote that my recent sudden trip abroad and the way I was sharing it on social media had alarmed the family. She hinted that I might be struggling mentally and suggested, in careful corporate language, that Lumen Vista keep an eye on me for potential reputational risk. Sophie read it twice. She told me she felt a slow burn start in her chest the second time through. She had sat next to me in open office rows for years. She had seen me stay late to finish prototypes, bring in donuts on release days, run user tests while fighting off a cold. She had never once seen me fish for pity. Daniel had added a calm, cautious note at the top. Company policy said that when a third party raised a mental health concern that mentioned potential safety or reputation issues, HR had to document it. He said he did not know the context and did not want to assume anything. He asked if anyone on my immediate team had noticed changes in my behavior, and, if so, to flag them privately. Sophie leaned back against her couch and stared at the ceiling for a moment. She thought about the last few weeks. I had been tired, sure. We were pushing a big update, and the end of year always felt like sprinting in sand. But I was still hitting deadlines, still answering messages, still showing up to stand up with my messy bun and my thermos of coffee. The only unusual thing was that I had finally taken the vacation days my manager had been telling me to use. She scrolled back up and checked the timestamp on Megan's email. It had landed in Daniel's inbox right before midnight on Saturday, not in the middle of a workday, not after some big performance issue, right after my Paris photo began making the rounds back home. Sophie said she felt something click into place then. This was not about concern for my well-being. This was strategy. My own family was trying to get ahead of a story. None of them were brave enough to tell honestly. She typed a measured response to Daniel. She said she had not seen any signs that I was unstable or unsafe. She mentioned that I was on a long overdue vacation and that my work had been solid. She did not editorialize. She knew better than to call out my sister-in-law in writing. But she did what she could to put some weight on the other side of the scale. While she was doing that, Daniel sat at his kitchen table with his laptop open, the light from the screen reflecting in his glasses. He had worked in HR long enough to know when a family story did not add up. But policy was policy. He opened a new file under my name, labeled it cautiously, and logged the incoming email as a third-party concern. Then, because he actually did care about the humans behind the files, he drafted a short message to me. He kept it neutral and kind. He said he hoped I was enjoying my time off, that traveling during the holidays could bring up complicated feelings, and that when I got back, he would love to schedule a quick check-in to make sure I felt supported. He did not mention Megan by name. He said only that he had received a note from a relative and wanted to make sure I heard that from him, not through the office grapevine. He hit send. The email slipped quietly across the ocean and landed in my inbox while I was standing on a bridge taking pictures of the river. That night in Paris, back in my small hotel room, I kicked off my boots and sat on the edge of the bed. The radiator hissed faintly. I rubbed my feet through my socks and opened my laptop, telling myself I would only peek at my personal email to clear any spam. Daniel's name at the top of my inbox made my stomach drop before I even clicked. My brain ran through a list of worst-case scenarios in a split second. Layoffs, budget cuts, project canceled. By the time the email opened, my heart was already pounding. As I read his message, the pounding shifted into something colder. He did not say much, but he said enough. A family member had written. They were worried. He wanted to check in when I returned. I stared at the word family until it blurred. My first thought was almost absurd. I wondered which one of them had finally discovered how to type Daniel's last name correctly. Then the second thought came, heavier. They were not just calling my phone to scold me now. They were reaching into the one place I had built that had nothing to do with them. The one place where I had carved out respect on my own. I closed the laptop slowly. Like maybe if I did it gently, the message would soften somehow. The room felt suddenly smaller. The Eiffel Tower lights flickered faintly in the distance through my window. but they felt very far away. I lay back on the bed and stared at the cracked white ceiling. My mind raced ahead to my return flight, to sitting across from Daniel in a small conference room, to trying to explain that my sister-in-law liked to play savior while lighting fires behind people. But beneath the dread, something else started to form. A thin, hard line of anger, not wild and flailing like a blaze, but focused, like a wire pulled taut. My family had decided there was no room for me in their cabin. Now, from that same cabin, they were trying to squeeze me out of my own life somewhere else. I turned on my side and pulled the thin blanket up to my chin. The city sounds drifted in from the street, soft and unfamiliar. The glow from the tower painted a faint stripe on the wall. Sleep did not come easily. When it finally did, it was shallow and restless. I dreamt of office hallways that turned into pine-covered mountains, of my badge not opening doors anymore, of my mom standing in the lobby of Lumen Vista with a casserole dish and a scowl, telling Daniel that I was making everyone uncomfortable. In the morning, I woke up with my jaw aching from clenching it in my sleep. My phone buzzed on the nightstand as fresh messages stacked up. Little digital taps from across the ocean. I pressed my palm flat against my chest and took a slow breath. They were coming at me from both sides now, family and work. For the first time in a long time, I felt the beginning of a decision forming in me. Something small and steady, like a thin line pulled tight inside my chest. I stayed still in the quiet of the hotel room until the sun finally pushed soft, pale light through the curtains. Then I sat up, washed my face, and went out into the cold morning. I walked without picking a direction first. Paris moved around me with that winter softness. People bundled in scarves, little shops opening their doors, the river carrying a faint mist above its surface. I should have felt peaceful, but the buzzing in my phone never truly stopped. It was like my life back home kept tugging at the edge of my coat. I ignored it as long as I could. A couple of hours later, I ducked into a bakery for something warm and sweet. I ordered a brioche and a coffee and slid into a corner table near a heater that clicked softly. The smell of butter and yeast wrapped around me, and for a moment, I allowed myself to sit still. Then I pulled out my phone. The first thing I saw was my mom's church page, the one she loved to browse during her quiet evenings. I did not follow it directly, but a post had been shared by one of my old church friends and tagged with my name. At the top of the page was a post made by Mrs. Delaney, the head of the church committee. Her profile picture was the same one she had used for years, the one taken after a charity breakfast where she stood in front of tables of donated mittens and canned goods. She had always liked me. She liked anyone who showed up early and stayed late without being asked. Her post was simple. She wrote asking why Mackenzie was not in the family cabin this year, since she had always been such a help to the church. Underneath her post was a small string of comments. Then more. And more. I scrolled slowly. It felt like watching something unfold through a window. One woman asked if I had gotten sick. Another wondered if I had finally taken a vacation because I worked too hard. A third mentioned that her granddaughter had loved the new art supplies I had, dropped off during the summer, and added that she hoped I was doing okay. None of them sounded angry. They sounded confused, concerned, and genuinely fond of me in a way I had not expected to see written out like that. Then I noticed something else. Comments were disappearing. I would scroll down, see a few, refresh, and suddenly there were fewer. My mom was deleting them. I knew that pattern too well. Whenever things looked messy in her online world, she tidied them the same way she cleaned up spilled salt on the kitchen counter. Fast, anxious, determined. But as the comments vanished, new ones appeared even faster. Some women reposted the same questions. Others wrote little lines asking for prayers for me, just in case. A couple added soft reminders that every child deserved a place at the Christmas table. The more she tried to erase, the more attention she drew. I pressed my thumb to the center of the screen, trying to steady my breathing. My mom always cared about her image inside that church. She spent hours preparing food for potlucks, decorating for events, making sure her outfits were just right for Sunday mornings. People there had become her social world, her circle of approval, the place she felt seen. The idea that they might think poorly of her must have been cutting her open from the inside. My phone vibrated with a new notification. It was from Pastor Carol. She had sent my mom a public message, but she had also messaged me directly. Her words were gentle. She said I had always been a bright light in the community and that she prayed I was safe and warm wherever I was celebrating Christmas this year. I closed my eyes for a moment and let the kindness settle into me. It was strange how unfamiliar it felt. Then I saw a new post appear under the original thread. This one was from an older woman named Sharon, someone who kept track of donations every holiday season. Her message was clear. She wrote that she had been checking receipts and realized that several of the anonymous donations made that year had come from me. Then she added that people should know I had contributed quietly and generously, and that she hoped I was surrounded by love wherever I was. Attached to her comment was a screenshot of a donation receipt from early fall. My name sat in the corner, barely noticeable, but visible enough for anyone to understand that I had been helping the church. Behind the scenes, long before this holiday mess began, the effect was immediate. The thread exploded with heart-filled comments and kind words. People wrote about the times I had helped at the food pantry, how I always arrived early to stack boxes, or stayed late to sweep the floors. Someone mentioned how I used to tutor their grandson during the school year. Another said they had missed seeing me at the church bazaar and hoped I would come back sometime. For a moment, I just sat there in the small bakery with my brioche untouched, reading the things people said about me. It was like discovering evidence of my own existence in places I had not realized I mattered. But then I thought of my mom, reading the same comments. I pictured her in that big cabin kitchen, apron tied too tight, hands shaking as she tried to delete things faster than they appeared. She must have felt the eyes of her friends and the pressure of every question. I imagined her turning to my dad, upset, and him brushing it off until the weight of public attention forced him to care. I imagined my phone lighting up again and again as they tried to regain control of a narrative that had slipped out of their hands. The bakery door opened and a gust of cold air swept in, stirring the napkins on the counter. I looked up and saw a family walk in, their cheeks pink from the wind. A boy tugged on his dad's sleeve and pointed at a tray of pastries. His mom leaned down and kissed the top of his head. The image pressed heat into my eyes. Not tears exactly, but something close. I blinked and looked back at my phone. One last comment had appeared under Sharon's post. It came from a woman I barely knew, someone who simply wrote that sometimes the ones who do the most for others are the ones forgotten in their own homes. I swallowed hard. There was nothing I could say to that, nothing that would make the truth feel any smaller. I gathered my things slowly, slipped my phone back into my coat pocket, and stepped out into the cold street. The air bit at my cheeks and the city hummed around me. The day felt heavier now, like the weight of what was happening back home had finally caught up to me. I started walking again, my boots clicking softly on the pavement, thinking of church ladies in their warm sweaters and kind voices, thinking of my mom scrambling to hide a truth she could not control anymore, thinking of what was waiting for me when I got back to Seattle. The decision forming inside me grew a little clearer with each step. Paris has a way of softening the edges of your thoughts, even when your heart feels like a fist. The next few days, I let my feet decide where to go, as if my body knew what my mind needed before I did. One morning, I climbed up toward Montmartre, my breath turning to little clouds in the cold air. The streets were narrow and uneven, lined with small shops and painters setting up their easels, even though the fingers had to be freezing. I watched a man sketch the outline of the hill and thought about how some people could just see a blank space and imagine something better on top of it. I made my way toward the big white basilica on the hill, Sacré-Cœur, and sat on the stone steps with a paper cup of coffee between my palms. The city, all the roofs and chimneys and distant spires blending into one long line. Families were scattered on the steps around me, wrapped in scarves, taking photos and passing paper cones of roasted chestnuts back and forth. I tried to let the sounds wash over me, the chatter in French and English, the distant sirens, the buskers playing soft guitar somewhere behind me. But my mind kept wandering back to Washington, to the cabin, to my mom frantically deleting comments on the church page. Later that afternoon, I wandered through the Louvre, not really following the map, just letting myself drift from room to room. I looked at paintings of families posed stiffly together, fathers with serious faces, mothers holding baby, siblings standing close enough to touch. In some of them, one figure stood slightly apart, off to the side, eyes turned away from the rest. I could not stop seeing myself in that spot every time. When I came back to Claire's cafe near the end of the day, the sky was already dark. She took one look at my face and slid a mug of hot chocolate in front of me, without asking. She leaned on the counter across from me, wiping a glass with a towel, more out of habit than need. "Rough day?" she asked gently. I told her a little. Not everything, but enough. I said that my family had filled a cabin without me and invited a man they barely knew instead. I said that people at my old church were asking where I was and that my mom was panicking more about her reputation than my safety. I did not cry. My voice stayed strangely calm, like I was reading someone else's story. Claire listened. Really listened. Her dark eyes steady on mine. Then she set the glass down and shook her head slowly. "In my family," she said, "if someone tried to leave a child out of a picture, my grandmother would have thrown the camera into the river." Then she smiled a little and added that she believed something very simple. No one deserves to be left out of the family photo. Not the real one. Not the one in the heart. Her words hit somewhere deep and old inside me. It was such a basic truth, something you would teach a child in Sunday school, but hearing it out loud from a stranger in a warm cafe in Paris made me realize how long I had been living as if it were not true for me. That night in my hotel room, I could not stop replaying old holidays in my head. The year my parents took Emily and Ethan on a Caribbean cruise and told me at 16 that there was no space in the cabin, that the booking had gotten mixed up. The photo they had sent from the ship, with a little handwritten line on the back telling me they wished I was there. The year they went to Las Vegas for Ethan's birthday and said it was not appropriate for a young woman my age, then came back with stories about all the shows they had seen that were perfectly family-friendly. My college graduation, when I walked across the stage and scanned the stands for my dad's bald spot and my mom's favorite red scarf, and saw 3 empty seats instead. The text they sent later saying they had lost track of time at a wine tasting while they celebrated Ethan's new job. Every time there has been a reason. A budget issue, a scheduling thing, a misunderstanding. Somewhere along the way, I had started believing that I was the extra chair, the one you kept or tossed depending on how many guests showed up. I was sitting cross-legged on the bed, the Eiffel Tower light flashing faintly in the distance through my window, when my phone buzzed with a different kind of insistence. It was not another voicemail. It was a FaceTime request from Emily. For a second, I almost let it slide away. Then I hit accept. Her face filled the screen, flushed and blotchy. Behind her, I could see a corner of the cabin living room, the stone fireplace, stockings hung in a perfect row. I heard voices in the background, the clatter of dishes, my dad saying something I could not quite make out. Emily did not say hello. She launched straight into it, her voice a mix of anger and hurt. She said that I had no idea what I had done, that ever since I posted that picture from Paris, everyone had been coming after her. She said people were sending her messages, asking how she could leave her own sister behind, asking how she could bring a boyfriend of 3 months on a family trip when there was no room for me. She pressed the heel of her hand to her forehead and let out a shaky breath. She said she was being painted as the bad guy, the sister who picked a man over her own blood. She said the church ladies were looking at her like she had kicked a puppy on Christmas morning. I listened, letting her words tumble out. It struck me that she was not asking if I was all right. She was asking why I had made her look bad without ever saying those exact words. Out of the corner of the screen, I saw movement. Aiden was in the room behind her, off to one side, half in the frame. He was leaning against the wall with his arms folded, watching the screen with an expression I could not quite read. Not smug, not amused, something closer to weary. Emily kept talking, saying that if I had just stayed quiet and stayed home, nobody would be saying these things. She said our parents were exhausted, that Dad was furious, that Mom was on the edge of tears all the time, and it was all such a mess now. Finally, she stopped for air and looked straight at me, eyes shining. She asked how I could put her in this position, how I could let everyone think she had chosen Aiden over me. There was a long pause. I could hear the faint crackle of the fire on their end, the muffled sound of a television playing in another room. On my side of the world, Paris traffic hummed far below my window. Before I could decide how to answer, I heard Aiden's voice. He had not moved closer, but he did not bother to lower his tone enough for me not to hear. "I think they are right," he said quietly. Emily's head snapped around. "What did you say?" she demanded, her voice going sharp. Aiden pushed off the wall and stepped a little more into view. His expression was calm, but there was a seriousness in his eyes I had not seen before. "I think they are right," he repeated. And this time, there was no mistaking it. "You did choose me over her. All of you did." For a moment, all three of us sat in that strange, split-screen silence. My sister's face froze in disbelief. Aiden standing there like someone who had just finally said something he had been holding back all week. And me, sitting in a hotel room in Paris, feeling something heavy inside my chest shift just a little. Something about the way Aiden said it landed like a stone dropping into deep water. I watched Emily's face twist, first with shock, then with that tight, defensive look she had worn since we were kids, and someone dared to point out she was wrong. She snapped at him that he did not understand, that he had only been around a few months, that family history was complicated. He just shook his head. I could see him clearly now in the upper corner of the screen, arms folded, jaw set. He said that sometimes it did not take long to see what was right in front of you. Then he looked straight into the camera for a second, right at me, like he wanted me to know he meant it. The call cut off a moment later. Emily hung up without a goodbye. My screen went black, and I stared at my reflection for a long time, the faint glow of the Eiffel Tower behind my shoulder, like a quiet witness. I did not know the details of what happened in that cabin right after, not in that moment. I learned them piece by piece later in half-guilty confessions and awkward conversations. But when I put it all together, it felt like watching a play I had missed the first act of, even though I had been part of the story all along. Back in Colorado, Aiden did not stay long after that call. He told Emily he needed air and stepped outside. The snow was still thick on the deck, the mountains stretching out in that perfect postcard view my dad had wanted so badly. But Aiden did not take pictures. He paced back and forth, his breath coming out in white bursts. Inside, my dad was complaining loudly about work messages, half watching a football game with the sound off. His company had a group chat where people shared vacation photos and light-hearted things during holidays. Someone had dropped my Paris picture in there, with a caption about solo trips and courage. A couple of his coworkers had commented that they wished they could sneak away. To Europe, too. One had written that the view was stunning and asked if it was his daughter, because she recognized my last name. Up until then, my dad had stuck to one story with his colleagues. He had told them his middle child barely scraped by in a cramped apartment and never took time off. Too busy with work to fly anywhere. Now there I was, on their screens, standing in front of the Eiffel Tower with the lights behind me. The story did not match, and he hated when things did not match. He typed a stiff reply in the chat, something about me winning a travel contest through my job. It did not sit right, and he knew it. When a younger coworker replied that he had seen people on social media talking about my caption and wondering why I was alone for Christmas, my dad slammed his laptop shut so hard the screen flickered. He went into the kitchen and snapped at my mom about the ham being overcooked, even though it was fine. When she looked startled, he hissed that people at church and at work were talking, and that this whole thing needed to be fixed before it ruined everything he had built. My mom had her own storm brewing. She had been dragged into a video meeting with the church committee that afternoon. At first, she thought it was just a friendly holiday check-in. Then she saw all their faces lined up in little frames on the laptop screen, serious and kind at the same time. Pastor Carol asked gently how I was doing. Mrs. Delaney mentioned the donation screenshot and said several women were worried because it looked like I had been very generous, and yet somehow not, included at my own family holiday. Another lady wondered aloud if there had been a misunderstanding, because no one could quite imagine my parents leaving me out on purpose. My mom tried to smile and explain that I had chosen to travel, that I was independent, that young people were different these days, tradition. But the more she talked around the question, the quieter the other women got. Finally, one of them, a soft-spoken retired teacher named Joyce, said that from the outside, it looked like a pattern. She said they had noticed I had not been in the last several Christmas photos, that I always seemed to be missing from big events. She said they loved my parents, but they loved me too, and that they could not pretend not to see that something was off. My mom's face went tight. She insisted there was no issue, that families were complicated, and that things were being misunderstood online. Pastor Carol waited a moment and then said that when I came home, the church would like to speak with me directly, woman to woman, to hear my side of things. She said it gently, but the message was clear. They were done taking my mom's word as the only version of the truth. The call ended with polite blessings and Merry Christmas wishes. My mom closed the laptop and sat at the kitchen table for a long time, her hands pressed flat on the wood, breathing slowly, like she was trying not to be sick. Upstairs, Megan was facing a different kind of reckoning. At her own job, far from the cabin, her manager in human resources had pulled her into a private meeting earlier that week. The message had gone something like this: personal family issues should never cross into professional interference with another company's staff, especially not through formal channels disguised as concern. They told her that reaching out to my employer with a long emotional email about my supposed instability, while identifying herself with her corporate title, bordered on misuse of her role. Technically, it had not broken any written rule yet, but it came close enough to earn a strong warning. They let her know that if anything similar happened again, it would go straight into her performance file. By the time Christmas Eve arrived, the picture inside that mountain cabin was not nearly as perfect as the photos suggested. Aiden watched my dad bark orders, watched my mom flutter between the oven and her phone, watched Emily jump every time her notifications buzzed. Eventually, he told Emily that the way I was being treated did not sit right with him. He said he had grown up in a messy family too, and that he knew the difference between normal conflict and someone being used as a permanent scapegoat. He told her he could not enjoy pretending everything was fine while my name kept popping up on screens as the problem everyone blamed. Emily begged him to stay, said they could fix it, that it was just a bad weekend. He shook his head. He respected her, he said, but he needed to step away from a situation that felt this wrong. So he packed his bag, thanked my parents in the living room with stiff politeness, and walked out into the snow. My dad muttered something about drama. My mom just watched him leave with a pinched mouth, already rewriting the story in her mind, so she could tell people later that he had been unstable from the start. That night, the cabin glowed from the outside like a postcard, lights warm against the snow, smoke rising from the chimney. But inside, the air was tight. My dad scrolled through his work messages, jaw clenched. My mom hovered over her phone, watching the church page like someone watching a storm on a radar. In that same hour, far away in Washington, the church committee made a decision in a quiet group message. They agreed that when I returned, they would sit down with me themselves. No more guessing, no more filtered updates. They wanted to hear directly from the woman who had sat in their kitchens and stacked boxes in their food drives and showed up quietly at their bake sales with extra pies. They wrote that they would reach out after the holidays. They wrote that sometimes the only way to get to the truth was to ask them, person at the center of the silence. I did not know that last part yet. Not while I was lying on a narrow hotel bed in Paris with the city lights flickering against the ceiling. All I knew was that my phone had gone strangely quiet for the first time in days, and that somewhere between the cathedral steps and Claire's hot chocolate and Aiden's one honest sentence, the story I had lived my whole life was starting to come apart at the seams. I barely slept the night before my flight. Paris had wrapped itself around me like a warm coat, but the thought of stepping back into my real life made my chest feel tight. Still, morning came. I packed quietly, checked out of the hotel, and took a cab to the airport, while the sky over the city glowed a pale silver. The flight to Seattle felt both endless and too fast. I kept replaying everything in my head, from the church comments to Aiden's quiet honesty, to the hollow look on Emily's face before she hung up on me. By the time I landed, the rain was coming down in thin, icy sheets, the way it always did in Washington around late December. The streets glistened and cars moved in slow, patient lines, wipers beating in rhythm like tired hearts. I found my old sedan in the airport garage, brushed off the layer of wet leaves that had blown onto the windshield, and drove home. My apartment welcomed me with its familiar quiet. I unpacked only what I needed for the night: set my suitcase by the closet, and collapsed into bed. When my alarm rang the next morning, it felt like being yanked out of one world and shoved into another. I showered, dressed in a soft gray sweater and black slacks, tied my hair back, and drove to Lumen Vista. The office was buzzing with that odd post-holiday energy, everyone still half sleepy from travel and leftovers. I tried to slip into the building unnoticed, hoping I could make it to my desk before anyone greeted me. That hope lasted 6 minutes. My desk phone rang just as I opened my laptop. It was a reception. Her voice was tight. "Mackenzie, your dad is here." My stomach dropped. I asked if she was sure, and she whispered that she had tried to tell him to wait outside, but he insisted on speaking with me immediately. Before I could respond, I heard him. His voice carried even through the glass walls of the lobby. He was not shouting yet, but the tone was sharp and clipped, the way he spoke when he believed he was owed something. I stood slowly. Part of me wanted to stay seated, as if stillness might make him disappear. But I walked toward the lobby because hiding had never helped me before. He saw me the second I stepped out. His face was flushed, jaw tight, eyes bright with the kind of anger he always saved for moments he felt embarrassed. He held a red folder in his hand. At least, I thought it was a folder. When he got closer, I saw it was a single sheet of paper inside a protective cover. His voice rose as soon as he was within a few feet. "There you are." Finally, I kept my face neutral. "Dad, you cannot be here. This is my job." He thrust the paper toward me. "You are going to fix this, right now." I looked down at the page. It was some kind of typed apology, written in the formal, overly polished language he used for business emails. It said I regretted causing confusion during the holiday, that my trip had been spontaneously booked without communication, that my photo had been misinterpreted, that my family had done nothing wrong. It was signed with my name typed at the bottom, waiting for my signature in ink. I felt my throat tighten, but not with fear, with disbelief. "Dad," I said quietly, "I am not signing this." His face darkened. "You will sign it. You will send it to your mother and your sister, and we will post it in the family group chat, and this will all be put to rest. Your little stunt ruined Christmas. This is the least you can do." A few employees passing through the lobby slowed down, pretending not to look. A security guard turned his head, and then, through the main doors, a familiar figure walked in, wearing a long, tan coat and carrying a tote bag, decorated with little watercolor flowers. My Aunt Louise. My dad's older sister, my favorite human being in our whole family. She had texted me a few days earlier, saying she was sorry for the way the trip unfolded, and that she loved me. I did not expect to see her here. She moved fast, stepping in front of me like she was shielding a child. Her voice was steady but full of fire. "Richard, what in the world are you doing?" My dad's head jerked toward her, surprised. "Louise, this is none of your business." She lifted her chin. "That is where you are wrong. When you come into your daughter's workplace and start causing a scene, it becomes everyone's business." She glanced at me, her eyes soft for just a second before turning hard again. "You need to leave. Now." He stepped forward. "I will not leave until she signs this paper." I felt Louise shift slightly, blocking him with her shoulder. She spoke slowly, with the kind of quietness that always scared my dad more than shouting. "You are embarrassing yourself, and you are hurting her." I could see the muscle in his jaw twitch. He opened his mouth to argue, but another voice cut through the space. "Mr. Hart, you need to step away." Daniel, from HR, walked in with a folder tucked under his arm. His voice was calm but firm, the same tone he used in compliance meetings. "You are trespassing. We asked you not to come beyond the lobby without authorization. If you do not leave, we will have to involve the police." My dad turned toward him in disbelief. "You cannot be serious. I am her father." Daniel did not flinch. "And she is an employee in our building. Your presence is creating a safety concern. Please leave willingly, or security will escort you out." My dad's face went bright red. For a moment, I thought he might yell, might do something reckless, might push past all of us with sheer stubbornness. But then he looked around, at the employees watching from behind desks, at the receptionist frozen in her chair, at the security guard stepping closer, and at me. the only person in the room not looking away from him. Something in his expression shifted. Not sadness, no apology, just the cold sting of humiliation. He pointed a finger at me. "This is not over." Then he turned sharply and walked out, shoulders stiff, steps too loud. The security guard followed him all the way to the entrance. The glass doors slid open and swallowed him into the rain. The room was silent for several seconds. Then Louise exhaled and turned to me with a look that mixed pride and heartbreak. "You did not deserve a single second of that," she said softly. I swallowed hard. "Thank you for coming." She touched my arm. "You are not alone in this. Not anymore." Daniel cleared his throat gently. "Mackenzie, when you have a moment later today, please stop by my office. There are a few things we need to go over, but you are not in any trouble." My shoulders loosened a little. "All right." Louise looped her arm through mine and guided me away from the lobby. I could still feel the pressure of the paper he had tried to force on me. The fake apology. The one thing he thought would erase everything. But it is gone now. And some part of me knew that something much larger had just snapped open, like a seam that had finally ripped after years of strain. I was not sure what would happen next, but for the first time, it would not be on his terms. Louise walked me back to my desk and sat on the edge of the extra chair like she was anchoring the room for me. My hands were still shaking a little, but it was a different kind of tremor now, more like after a long run than after a scare. She touched my wrist and said that she had seen a lot of things in this family, but watching me stand there and not fold might be her favorite one. Then she headed out, promising to check on me that weekend, leaving behind the faint smell of coffee and the feeling that somebody, somewhere, had my back without conditions. Late that morning, I walked into Daniel's office. He had a stack of folders on his desk and my file open on his screen, but his expression was calm, not critical. He told me I was not in trouble. In fact, he said, I had done everything right. I had informed them when the family messages started crossing into workplace territory. I had been transparent about the trip and the social media attention. Then he mentioned the email from Megan. He had already shown me a copy while I was in Paris, but now he told me that our legal team had reviewed it. They called it an inappropriate attempt by a third party to interfere with an employee's standing. He said they had formally blocked her address and documented the whole thing as external harassment, not as any reflection on me. He added, almost as an afterthought, that people in the leadership team respected how I had handled the situation, especially that I had brought data, not drama, as he put it. He smiled a little when he said that, like he had borrowed the phrase from somewhere. That afternoon, the quiet consequences started rolling in. Not to me, but back toward them. I heard about my dad through a coworker who knew someone at his firm. My dad had built this public image at work for years, the devoted family man with the perfect holiday photos and the sentimental stories about his kids. That security incident at my building did not stay contained. Someone had recorded a bit of it from the mezzanine, just a few seconds of him raising his voice and being walked out by security, and that clip had ended up in a private chat where people swapped office. Gossip. Nobody posted it publicly, but inside his company, it spread fast. People started seeing the other cracks, too. The way he dismissed younger colleagues in meetings. The sharpness in his tone when things did not go his way. When the same Paris photo that had circled my office appeared in his corporate group chat again. This time with fewer jokes and more silence. Nobody was buying the old story anymore. The man who bragged constantly about his close-knit family was suddenly the man whose daughter had to have him escorted out of her workplace. He did not get fired. Men like him rarely do. Not right away. But the next big family-themed marketing campaign did not go to his team. A new colleague was asked to present instead of him. The word that floated around, the one I heard through the grapevine, was that he was no longer the safe face of that brand. My mom's world shifted in a quieter way. Linda had lived for years on the approval she got from the church women, organizing bake sales and pageants, being the first one Pastor Carol called when a nursery room needed repainting. After the Zoom meeting where they questioned her about me, things had felt off, and she could sense it. A week after I got back, the church sent out the planning notes for next Christmas. For the first time in years, My mom's name was not listed on the holiday events committee. She called Mrs. Delaney to ask if there had been a mistake. What she heard instead was that it might be good for her to rest this year, to focus on family, and to let others step in. She told Louise later that it felt like being quietly set aside, that people did not rush up to her after service anymore to compliment her. Decorations. That she had seen a couple of the older ladies in the hallway looking at her, then looking away. She blamed me. She did not see how many of those same women had been praying for me in their kitchens for years. Emily's reckoning came from another direction. Her friends had all seen my Paris post and the way it had bounced through social media. More than one of them messaged her directly, asking some version of the same question. Why had her sister spent Christmas in France alone, while there was a full cabin of people in Colorado? She tried to repeat the story she and my parents had settled on, that I was busy, that I preferred to travel, that I did not like crowds. But the people who had actually met me did not buy that. One friend reminded her how I was the one who watched their kids during barbecues, how I stayed late to help clean up when others went home. Another pointed out how strange it was that a boyfriend of a few months had a seat in the cabin, when a daughter born into the family did not. After Aiden left the cabin early, he did not ghost her, but he pulled back. When he eventually sat her down over coffee back in the city, he told her gently that he cared about her, but he could not build something serious with someone who could watch her own sister get cut out and call it a misunderstanding. He said that he had grown up in a house full of lies and that he was trying not to repeat the pattern. For all the ways she tried to stay loyal to our parents, something in Emily cracked that day. She did not rush to defend them. For the first time, she sat there and considered the possibility that maybe, just maybe, the rest of the world could see something she had been trained not to notice. Megan's karma came wrapped in corporate language. The ethics committee at her company reviewed her late-night email to my HR director and did not like what they saw. She got a formal ethics warning written out and dropped into her personnel file. She was removed from a high-profile project about employee well-being that she had been bragging about for months. Colleagues who used to come to her for advice about sensitive issues grew hesitant. Word traveled quietly that she had blurred the line between her professional authority and her personal resentment. For someone whose identity was built on being the trusted human resources expert, that shift cut deep. While their world narrowed, mine started to open. A few days after the lobby incident, Lucas, the vice president of product at Lumen Vista, called me into his office. He was a big picture guy, always thinking in roadmaps and future quarters. He asked how I was holding up, and he asked in a way that felt like a human being, not like a manager checking a box. Then he told me he wanted me to lead a new initiative we had been discussing for months. A wellness and boundaries-centered feature inside one of our flagship apps, something that would help users manage family expectations and digital overload during high-stress seasons like the holidays. He said that my work had always been strong, but that this situation had shown him something else, that I understood what it meant to draw a line and stay behind it, even when it hurt. He wanted that perspective baked into the product. The project came with a raise and more visibility. It also came with a quiet message underneath it, one that said loud and clear that my company did not see me as broken or unstable. They saw me as someone worth trusting with more. One evening, about 2 weeks after everything had settled into this new, uneasy normal, I came home from work to find a small stack of mail on my doormat. Most of it was junk. One envelope stood out, thick cream paper, my name written in careful looping script. No return address, just a simple church name stamped in the corner. I carried it into the kitchen, poured myself a cup of tea, and sat at the table before opening it. Inside was a folded note on church letterhead, but the words were handwritten. Several different styles of cursive crowded the page, like a patchwork quilt of voices. They thanked me for the years I had helped in the background, for the way I had shown up quietly for food drives and youth nights. They said they were sorry they had not asked more questions sooner. Near the bottom, in the familiar, neat handwriting of Pastor Carol, was one line that made my throat close. "You have always had room with us, Mackenzie." I read that sentence 3 times. It did not magically erase the hurt. It did not turn those women into surrogate mothers, but it did something small and important. It reminded me that while one table had been pushing my chair away for years, there had always been another one, where someone had set out an extra plate, even if I had not noticed. I set the letter back in the envelope and left it on the counter where I could see it. Outside, the Seattle rain tapped against the window. My phone buzzed once on the table, a new message appearing on the screen. This time, it was not from my parents. It was from Louise, asking if I wanted to come over for dinner and a quiet Christmas Eve. The invitation sat on my screen like a soft place to land. I typed that I would love to and set the phone down, the letter from the church still resting beside my cup of tea. The next morning, a group video call request appeared on my phone while I was pulling on my coat. I stared at the screen for a few seconds before accepting it. My parents and siblings appeared in their little boxes, the lighting uneven, and the mood even more so. My dad looked irritated. My mom looked tired. Ethan looked stone-faced, and Emily looked as if she had been crying, but did not want anyone to ask. My dad started talking immediately. He said they needed me to post something to calm everything down, that I needed to tell people the family had not abandoned me, that the whole situation had been blown out of proportion by outsiders who did not understand how families worked. He said that the misunderstanding had caused a lot of unnecessary trouble at church and at his job, and it was my responsibility to correct it. My mom chimed in with her softer but sharper tone, the one that always cut more deeply, because it came wrapped in disappointment. She said people were judging her unfairly, and that I needed to help repair them. Damage. I listened without interrupting, letting their words wash past me like a cold tide. When they finally paused, waiting for me to agree the way I always had, I took a breath. No, I will not post anything. For a moment, nobody spoke. The stillness was sharp. My dad leaned closer to the screen, his voice rising. He said that I was being selfish, that I could not possibly understand the position I'd put the family in, that my silence had consequences for everyone. He ended with the same accusation he had used my entire life. You are tearing this family apart. I felt something inside me settle. Not loudly, not triumphantly, but peacefully, like a door gently clicking shut. No, I said. I am not tearing the family apart. I am just not letting the family tear me apart anymore. The screen went quiet again. My mom's mouth opened and closed like she wanted to argue but could not find the right angle. Ethan looked away. Emily swallowed hard, her eyes flickering uncertainly. For the first time in a long time, she did not rush to correct me or defend them. She just looked at me like she was seeing something she had not bothered to look for before. I could see her working up to something. Maybe an apology, maybe a confession that she had known somewhere deep down that this was wrong. Maybe just the start of a sentence that mattered. But whatever it was, she could not get it out. Her lips parted, trembled, then closed again. My dad's voice cut back in, louder this time, desperate and angry. He said that I did not understand loyalty or family, that I had embarrassed them, that I had acted like a child. He said I needed to stop being dramatic and fix what I had broken. But his voice no longer made my chest tighten the way it had when I was a child. It did not make my hands go cold or my mind rush to find ways to soothe him. It just sounded like noise. I told them I wished them well. I told them I hoped they had a peaceful holiday. And then I told them I would not be part of a story that erased me to make them look better. Before any of them could respond, I ended the call. The apartment went quiet. My breath shook once and then steadied. Outside, the December rain hit the window in slow, soft taps, almost like applause. I grabbed my keys and drove across town to Louise's house. She lived in a little craftsman with a wide front porch and strings of warm lights along the railing. Through the front window, I could see the soft orange glow of her fireplace and the shadow of her granddaughter Mia running back and forth with the chaotic joy only children possess. When I pulled into the driveway and stepped out of the car, the front door swung open. Mia sprinted down the steps in fuzzy socks and threw her arms around my waist. "Aunt Kenzie," she shouted, "you made it! This is your Christmas!" I bent down and hugged her, feeling the warmth of her little arms around my neck. Louise came out behind, smiling in that way that made every bone in my body loosen. Inside, the house smelled like cinnamon and pine, and something roasting slowly in the oven. The tree was crowded with ornaments that did not match, each one with some small history behind it. I took off my coat, and for the first time in a long time, felt like I was stepping into a room where nobody needed me to shrink. We spent the evening cooking, laughing, letting the night unfold without performance or pressure. After dinner, we walked outside wrapped in blankets to watch the neighborhood fireworks that someone set off every Christmas Eve, like a tradition no one questioned anymore. The sky cracked open with color, bright bursts of red and gold against the dark. I tilted my head back, letting the cold air bite my cheeks, letting the sound echo in my chest like something being released. Louise stood beside me, her hand warm on my shoulder. Mia leaned against my side, her breath little clouds in the air. For the first time in years, Christmas did not feel like something I had to earn. It just felt like mine. And if you have ever been told you were too much or not enough for your own family, remember this: silence can be power, and truth can be the loudest revenge. Tell me in the comments what integrity means to you and where you are listening from.